Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was bad so you left, only to find out that something bad actually did happen? Couple of mates and I were really lucky. In our last year of secondary school, UK, we had a massive changing room for physical education split into two sections for either side of the year. We'd always use the B block, but this time, about 20 of us decided to follow the lead of one friend that said, "Why don't we use a block?" We questioned why, and he just replied, "I dunno, this side is so old and manky compared to a block." We were really early, so we were guaranteed space to get changed, etc. Once most people started filtering through the changing rooms, they noticed most people were at a block, so they all hopped on the bandwagon and ditched B block. B block ceiling collapsed 10 minutes later. Was at the Boston Marathon in 2013. Not sure why I ended up leaving, but I would have been right in the heat of the attack had I stayed an extra 10 minutes. I was lucky enough to end up on the last train out of the city before everything was locked down. I would always walk down the hallway in the night without turning the lights on. One night I get to the end of the hallway and have a sudden urgent feeling that I need to turn the lights on. I go all the way back to my room and turn the hallway light on and go back. Just in front of where I had decided to turn around was a huge and deadly tapered snake making its way from one room to another across the hallway. If it had bitten me in the dark, they wouldn't have been able to get me the correct antivenom. Yes, this happened in Australia. Australia. Friday, November 1, 2013, I had a flight that I was supposed to catch, but my boss told me that instead of traveling out of John Wayne Airport as originally planned, he had to change the flight to depart 3 hours later in LAX because the other 3 coworkers that he was sending to the conference lived closer to LAX and were delayed because one coworker had a very upset stomach and needed a few hours to get it settled. I instantly had a bad feeling about leaving the airport I was already inside of and going way out of my way to travel to LAX. I told my boss that I had already been screened through security and I was waiting outside my gate. He said, "Never mind." He then rerouted the other 3 coworkers to SNA, John Wayne, to catch a later flight. Good thing he didn't give me shit for that. The flight he had me scheduled for departed from Gate 35 in Terminal 3 at LAX. Back in the day when I was like 13, I didn't feel like going to my horseback riding lesson, so I stayed home. Turns out one of the horses in my group had a heart attack mid-air over a jump, landed on its face, which threw his owner over his head only to land on his body. I'm pretty okay with not witnessing that one. Rip Dakota, you are our favorite. Do you know that I give you money for uploading my videos to TikTok, and the one who gains the most views in a month gets an extra $1,000? More details on my Discord server, link in the comments. Sitting with some buddies smoking a cigar. For some reason I was like, we need to go get food now, like right now. We went to get some grub. Not even 5 minutes later, a 107mm rocket destroyed our smoking area. EDIT. To answer the prevalent question, FOB Shank, Rocket City, Afghanistan. I was between jobs and had picked up a gig spot welding these giant custom steel truck bumpers together. They were all labeled road armor. They paid me under the table, but something about it didn't feel right. Other guys there had no problem smoking on the job. The guy in the office was always yelling at his wife. I had a bad feeling, so I stopped showing up. The very day I decided not to show up, the place was raided by the police. The operation was creating counterfeit road armor bumpers. Also, illegal substances were found and seized. Everyone was arrested. I avoided this fate a few times. First, I went to a party when I was a senior in HS. It was at a restaurant that was closed for the evening, but I guess one of the kids' family owned it, so he had keys. He was charging everyone a few bucks to go in, so we paid. We were early at the party, so it was rather empty, and we hung out by the entrance. Some kid walked in, saw it was empty, and turned around and asked for his money back. They argued over it, but the kid got his money back and left, and no one thought anything of it. Around a half hour later, there were about 30 people there by now, and I just started getting this sick feeling. I told my friend I wanted to leave, and he didn't want to. It was a good party, lots of Spanish girls, drinks, and smoke, but I couldn't shake this feeling. I went and grabbed my buddy and said, "We need to go now." Luckily, he didn't question it. About 30 minutes after we left, someone came and shot the place up and hit 4 people. Luckily, no one. A lot of people were talking and believed it was the same group that left earlier. That always stuck with me because it was gonna be a good night and I just felt cold and wanted to go. It was a similar feeling to overwhelming depression coming over you the way at 180 to everything. This one is a little different but somewhat related. I was driving to a girl's house at 2 a.m. and I was pulling up to a green light. I didn't even realize it, but I was slowing down, like I was an autopilot. I wasn't drinking or smoking, just kind of tired and going through the motions. I realized I was slowing down, so I snapped out of it and pushed the gas, and a car blew through the red light going at least low off. If I hadn't paused for that few seconds, it would have been over. I think of that every time I'm driving late at night. A few months earlier, I was a passenger in a car that was T-boned at the next intersection with that street 4 blocks down. I swear that street is trying to kill me. They'll never get an East 8th. This past spring semester, some friends and I were going to an off-campus party and needed someone to drive us there and back so we could get drunk. This guy we sorta knew offered to take us if we gave him some gas money. We all just had a bad feeling about it and just figured we should have a night and watching movies instead. The guy struck the same deal with some other people going to the party after we left, and it turns out he got drunk at the party without telling them, drove back drunk, and got in a huge car wreck. Girl in the passenger seat died on the impact. Everyone else was in the hospital for weeks afterward. If we hadn't all had the gut feeling not to go, I could be dead. That's the kind of stuff that keeps you awake at 4 in the morning. So when I was 2 or 3, I had nightmares. I woke up, went to my foster parents' room, and informed them that there was a bee under my pillow. No, there's not, Arwen. Go back to sleep. Cue the rivers of tears. Finally, my foster mom goes into my room, switches my light on, says, "There aren't any bees in here." Look, as she picks up my pillow. And behold, a bee flew out. My mom shooed the bee out the window as I was sobbing hysterically. She gave me the strangest look and asked her how I knew the bee was there. I had no idea. My nightmare was completely unrelated. On a side note, I know of 2 other foster girls who have had nightmares or mysterious bee appearances. I was at a liquor store in a Chicago suburb trying to decide what I wanted to poison myself with that night. Walked to the counter and paid for my drink, asking the clerk how his day was going. "Could be worse, my friend," he said with a smile. 15 minutes later, a gunman walked in the store and robbed it. Clerk, his family member, and 2 customers. I was going to make a phone call before I went to go buy my drinks, but instead went to the store first. I'll never forget the clerk's words to me. So the clerk was totally right about his assessment of the situation. I was 16, driving my friends to school in my trusty Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra. There is a massive hill leading down into the main street through the town. We were at the bottom of the hill and were waiting to turn right up to the school. I had a sudden and overwhelming desire to go buy everyone Dairy Queen Blizzards before class, so I went to hastily turn into the left lane towards DQ, and my brain just stopped me like, "Trust me. Ice cream in a cup right now, man." About 5 seconds later, I hear a very faint semi-horn from behind us. An 18-wheeler's brakes had blown on the hill, and he was just busting down the super steep 2 kilometers long hill, gaining terrifying amounts of momentum. About 3 seconds later, the semi flew past us in the left lane I just about switched into to go get DQ, going about 150 kilometers per hour. When it blew past the intersection, it caught the tail end of a truck and vaporized it, launching it about 80 feet. That ended up putting 2 people in intensive care and left one of them paralyzed. None of my friends were wearing seatbelts. We all would have gotten absolutely annihilated in the most gruesome accident I could probably imagine. I then turned left to go celebrate at DQ for not unknowingly slaughtering me and 4 friends. TLDR, had a hankering for icy treats. Brain stopped me from obtaining said treats. Brain was correct. Semi-truck flew past with broken brake lines and shut up ahead of us. So I had a job freelancing a couple of days a week in a magazine office, and every day when I was there I stopped at the small shop next to the entrance to buy a pack of cigarettes. The shop was run by a charming young couple, and it was just a delight to drop into. Then one morning on my way to work, I decided to buy my cigarettes somewhere else. I had to cross a busy intersection to do so. I recall this as strong compulsion, no other symptoms of dread or unease. That was a day the small shop had an armed robbery at exactly the time I would usually be in there. Back in college, around Halloween, one of my friends insisted on going out to a club. Since he had never been to an actual Halloween bash before, he's from South Korea, we decided to take him to West Hollywood. The only problem was that all the places were packed and he was starting to throw a hissy fit. We were all starting to lose our temper with him at this point, since we did give up our own plans for the night just to take him out. The last place we decided to try was Pearl. The place was absolutely packed and something didn't feel right, so I talked the others into helping me convince him to just come grab some grub with us, head home, and come back some other time. He didn't go down willingly, and it left us all with sour tastes in our mouth. I remember telling him, "It's dude, it happens for a reason." About 20 or so minutes later, as we were chowing down on burgers at a joint less than a block away from Pearl, we started noticing a throng of panic-stricken people hurrying away from the direction of the club. Almost simultaneously, we see fire trucks rushing in that direction. Turns out that there was an electrical fire. All I could do at that point was look at Mr. Wambulance and say, "I told you." Was at home a few years ago, suddenly felt strange, depressed, and I went to my room. I felt spacey, a heavy silence fell upon me, and I laid down, eyes open, held my breath, and the only clear thought it had was of heroin, a drug I'd never done. The feelings vanished. I got up thinking, I'm weird. Right after, friend texts me that our mutual friend had just been found dead of a drug overdose. He was 18. I'll never forget that. He was beautiful. Not me, but my so and I were at the mall. I was getting hungry and wanted to get shitty food court junk food because sometimes that's what you want. So said no. And by the time we got to a real restaurant like 10 minutes later, all the TVs were showing special broadcasts about the out and stampede at said food court. I was mowing my backyard with a ride on a mower, and I began to get an overwhelming feeling of being watched. I started looking around and thought I saw a figure in the upstairs window. I tried to ignore this as no one was home and continued with mowing when I started to feel an unbearable sense of dread. This made me immediately stop. As I did so, the ground in front of me gave way, forming a 15-foot wide, 12-foot deep sinkhole. If I hadn't stopped immediately, I likely would have been crushed by the tractor. Low-frequency sounds, such as those caused when a large quantity of earth shifts, has been known to cause a sense of dread in humans. I met this cute girl on Halloween night, dressed like Indiana Jones, so I invited her to a party I was going to later. She drove with me to the party and I took her 2 friends too. We talked a little, but we ended up working the room and got split up. I had this overwhelming urge to find her and I ended up getting a little worried. Some guy had moved in and had brought her outside and taken her to a semi-private area underneath a patio balcony. I didn't really care what he thought, grabbed her by the hand, acted like it was important and led her out of the party and into the front yard. We both heard a massive crash as the very large patio with nearly 30 people on it collapsed above where she was standing 3 minutes before. I know most certainly that if I hadn't grabbed her, she wouldn't exist today. I ended up marrying her, and imagining how it almost never happened in such a dreadful way terrifies me. My wife and I rented a really nice cabin in Big Sur Cay for a few nights. She woke up panicky and crying, she never does, over a bad dream. Had an awful feeling after waking up. Told her we could go for a drive. The further we went, the better we felt. Stayed in Monterey for the night. The cabin burnt down. Still chills writing this years later. One time my mom and I went into Walmart and a few minutes later my mom felt creeped out, so we left. Next day we read the newspaper and apparently a man was stabbed to death behind the building while we were there. I get that feeling walking into Walmart too. Might just be the lingering pot smoke and sketchy atmosphere. I asked my mother to take me home early from Boy Scout camp because I was afraid of bears. A bear ravaged the camp the night I left. I once worked as a bank teller for 3 months. One day I just felt really sick and I kept asking the branch manager if I could go home because I wasn't feeling well. After the umpteenth time, he finally let me go home. I left at 2 p.m. and the bank got robbed just an hour and a half afterwards. Decided to quit after that. My mom tells this story a lot. She was working in an office and she suddenly had a powerful urge to leave her queue, just to leave and be somewhere else for no reason. Not a minute later, a 15-foot wide section of the ceiling collapsed, burying the floor in metal and plaster. She would have been crushed. I worked in a nursing home before I was a nurse and a guy was pretty poorly. We knew he'd die over the next few days. I had a funny feeling and went to check on him. His family said they didn't want him to die alone. As I walked in, he smiled, took his last breath and died. Kind of the right place at the right time. I just had a feeling I should check on him and I'm glad I did. He wasn't alone. One day, I really didn't want to go to high school. That same day, the school flooded and caught fire. One time, I really had a bad feeling about an unusual driving car and asked my gift to walk faster over the street. She laughed and said I should not worry. The car crashed into the woman next to us. I don't get why some pedestrians have this flippant attitude to giant metal machines. Just because it's the law does not suspend the laws of physics and circumstance. My wife, but it will be their fault. Me, yeah, but you'll still be hit by a car. If you haven't watched my other videos, then be sure to watch this one. I bet it will amaze you. Or you can watch all our videos in a row in this playlist. Write your stories in the comments, subscribe, turn on the bell, and go to our Discord. There we give you money for uploading our videos to TikTok. You uploaded, you gain views, you got money. Link in the comments.